Hello guys, this is your friend. We are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Jiraiya takes Naruto on a 3-year training trip, part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start a new fanfic. Naruto looked around the small village he and Ero Sennin had just entered. Like most of the villages he had been to in Hai no Kuni, Fire Country, the buildings were all made out of a mixture of wood and bricks, and were modeled in a Western style with flat rooftops and square architecture. Most of the buildings were shops that sold various wares and goods, which was obvious when Naruto observed the numerous people that were milling around looking in the windows. It had only been about a week since Naruto had left with Ero Sennin on this training trip, and the two had already been in 2 other cities in Hai no Kuni. So what are we going to be doing here, Ero Sennin? Naruto asked as he looked up at the larger male. Jiraiya was a fairly tall man, standing at about 6 feet 5 inches, making him taller than most of the people in Konoha with the exception of Kakashi. He had white hair that spiked up before going down to about mid-back. It was held in place by a Hidia-8 with 2 horns and the kanji for oil on it. He was wearing a green gi under a red vest and had wooden geta sandals rather than the standard shinobi sandals. Jiraiya looked down at his student and scowled. "What have I told you about respecting your elders, Gaki?" Naruto shrugged. "You'll get my respect when I feel you've earned it. So far all you've done is go to whore houses or peek on women, and I have yet to actually learn anything from you." Jiraiya sighed at his student's rather apathetic attitude. Ever since they had left Konoha, Naruto had changed. He had become a lot more quiet than the loudmouth the Sennin had met during the Chunin exams. In fact, he hadn't spoken more than a few words since they left Konoha. It was like the loudmouth had suddenly vacated the boy's head and this new person took his place. Most of the time Naruto stared at nothing and seemed to be in deep thought. Jiraiya was not sure what was bothering his apprentice but figured that he would find out what was wrong in time. Alright, the Toad Sennin sighed. "I have to meet a contact here who has some valuable information for me. After this is done I'll begin training you. How does that sound?" Naruto nodded. "That's fine." Jiraiya frowned at his godson's lack of enthusiasm but left it alone for now as he headed off. Naruto walked around the town, not really bothering to pay attention to where he was going at the moment. Truth was, he had been thinking a lot, mostly about himself and how he had not really taken his training seriously. When he was in the academy he had been more concerned with playing pranks to get attention, which had seriously hampered his ability to learn. Of course, half of the problem was that by the time he had found a teacher willing to actually teach him rather than try to sabotage his training, Naruto was so far ingrained in his pranking and loudmouth tendencies that it had simply become a habit. He shook his head and sighed. Despite that, it still wasn't an excuse for not bothering to learn when he was able to. Had he actually applied himself to learn what he could, he may have been able to keep Sasuke from leaving the village. There was another of his problems. Sasuke Uchiha had been someone he had considered a brother. He had always thought that even with the small rivalry they had going that they were still friends and always would be. That feeling had been dashed when Sasuke plunged to Chidori's into his chest not once but twice. Naruto was no longer sure if he could keep his promise to Sakura by returning the boy, not that it would matter anyways. Naruto was beginning to doubt that Sasuke would ever willingly return. Even if Naruto forced him to come back, he doubted Team 7 would ever be the same. Naruto shook his head of the morbid thoughts. Now wasn't the time to be dwelling on such things. Sasuke's defection had opened Naruto's eyes to the reality of his situation. He needed to get stronger. He had to train and try his hardest to become a real shinobi, not the loud brat who could not even bring back someone he considered a brother. As he was now, Naruto was lacking in every aspect of being a shinobi. Sure, he had the Rasengan, spiraling sphere, and Kage Bushin's shadow clones, but that was really it. In every battle he had fought so far, if it were not for the Kyuubi, Naruto knew he would have died. During the battle on the bridge, in the Nami no Kuni, Land of Waves, he had used it to fight Haku. During his fight with Orochimaru in the Forest of Death he had been forced to use it. His fight with Gaara, his fight with Sasuke, every major battle he had been in he had used it. Add on that he could not even use the Rasengan without the aid of a clone, he did not have proper control of his chakra and no set taijutsu style, or rather he just swung until he hit something. Naruto knew he had a lot of problems to fix. Looking up he found himself standing in front of a store that appeared to sell shinobi clothing. Naruto looked at his own attire. His bright orange track suit had been with him for as long as he could remember, not because he wanted to wear it. No, despite the fact that orange was his favorite color and was good for getting attention, the only reason he wore it was because it was the only thing he could afford. All the stores in Konoha had blacklisted him, making it nearly impossible to get a decent set of clothing. Hell, the only food he could even afford was ramen, which was why he ate it all the time. Even these clothes he had were costly, the man who sold them to him making him pay 3 times the price most people would spend for normal clothes. Deciding that if he wanted to become a real shinobi he should look like a real shinobi, Naruto walked into the store. The shop itself was fairly standard. There were many racks in the store with different styles of shinobi clothes in various colors. There was also a few areas that sold weapons, most of which were the standard kunai, shuriken, ninja wire and basic sealing scroll. Unlike Konoha, this was not a ninja village, so they did not have any specialty clothing and weapons. Naruto began to walk around the store to see what he might like. He looked at various forms of pants first. He wanted them to be in a dark color. Looking at a few of the different styles and colors he decided to buy several sets of dark blue cargo-styled pants. They had several pockets that looked like they were designed to hold various scrolls and were of a sturdy material that would not wear down. The next thing he went to were the shirts. Looking through them he went with a dark blue and black colors. Buying several sets of both sleeveless and long-sleeved shirts so that he would have some variety before he moved on, looking to see if there was anything else he might want. He eventually bought several other things, a pair of black fingerless gloves with metal plates on the back, a pair of black combat boots with steel-toed tips and a sealing scroll so he could carry it all. Walking up to the cash register which had an old man sitting at it, Naruto set the clothes down. The old man looked at him and began to tally up the price. That's quite a lot of stuff you bought, young man. The total will come up to 4,000 yen. Naruto reached into his pants pocket and pulled out Gama-chan, his frog wallet. Opening it up he looked to see how much he had. It was not well known, but Naruto was, despite not looking like it, was very stingy when it came to money. Living on the streets and having to be careful where he bought stuff and how much he bought, Naruto had been taught the value of cash. Right now he had 6,500 yen, he would be using about 2/3 of his savings, but in Naruto's eyes it was worth it. Taking out the necessary amount, Naruto gave it to the old man. "Excuse me, but do you have a place I could change?" Naruto asked, using a more respectful voice than he ever had before. "Yes, right over there." The old man pointed to a small changing stall that was somewhat hidden in the corner. "Thanks," Naruto replied, moving over to the stall. "No problem, young man." Naruto went into the stall and changed, opting to go for the sleeveless shirt instead of a long-sleeve one right now. He looked himself over in the mirror and nodded in satisfaction, sealing the rest of his clothes inside of the scroll he bought. Walking out of the store, Naruto created a cage bushin and told it to go find Jiraiya and tell him he was going to get some food. Walking around, Naruto eventually found a small stand that seemed to offer a variety of different foods. Naruto eventually settled on donburi with gyudon, beef, and began to eat. A few minutes later Naruto blinked as the memories of his clone finding Jiraiya drunk off his with several girls hanging off the man hit him. What was that? Naruto wondered as he tried to figure out what had just happened. He had never had that happen when he made a clone before. Of course, normally when he made clones he would spam them out as if they were going out of style, so maybe he just never noticed. As he ate he absently wondered if this could be used for training or if he only retained the memories of the clones when they dispelled. He would ask Aro Sennin when the man found him. A little while later said man walked into the stand and sat down next to him. He ordered a small bowl of ramen and waited for it to come. When it did, he began eating for a bit before deciding to speak. We'll be staying the night here. Tomorrow we're going to leave early and start your training. Naruto nodded. Speaking of training, I noticed that I gained the memory of my clone when it dispelled. Ho ho, Jiraiya said with a small hint of surprise and pride, so you found out the secrets of the Kage Bushin Naruto turned to face Jiraiya with an incredulous look, so you knew about this? Of course I knew, kid, Jiraiya snorted. I've been waiting to see when you would figure it out yourself. Naruto nodded again, deciding not to bother getting bent out of shape about over not being told. Do you think I would be able to use it for training? Jiraiya looked thoughtful for a moment. That could work. With your reserves you could easily learn things in months that many others would take years to get down. Though I imagine there would be some drawbacks to this method of training. Like what? Naruto asked. Jiraiya spent the next hour explaining the drawbacks of using Kage Bushin to train. XXXXXXXXXXXX. 1 month later. Naruto grunted as he came up and did another set of push-ups. He had been going at them for about an hour now and was just about finished. It had been a month since he had learned the Kage Bushin method, and Naruto's training had been progressing far faster than most people could ever hope to. Every day Naruto would create about 200 clones. Half of them would go through the taijutsu kata that Jiraiya was trying to teach him. The style was called Hamingutori no Ken, hummingbird style, and relied on high-speed attacks that were designed to inflict significant damage on the weak spots of the body, such as joints. The other half would work on chakra control, which was easily Naruto's worst subject, with genjutsu being a close second. Naruto had been told by Jiraiya that because of his massive reserves, doing things like genjutsu and medical jutsu would be impossible. However, if he got his control up, Naruto should at the very least be able to dispel high-level genjutsu even if he could not cast them. So his clones would do a mixture of exercises. Most of them would run around on a body of water with several large rocks sticking to different areas of the body while balancing Senbon or kunai on his fingers. He hoped that he could at least get Anbu-level chakra control by the end of the training trip. While his clones were doing that, Naruto would work on the physical aspect, training his body to withstand high-speed combat. Every morning Naruto would wake up and do his workout. Currently he would do a 15-mile run, 400 push-ups, 400 sit-ups, 200 pull-ups, 1000 squats, 500 kicks and 500 punches. Each week he would add 5 miles and 100 more of each exercise. He had gotten inspiration for the training regimen from his friend Rock Lee, a boy who could only use taijutsu. While Naruto was considered a ninjutsu specialist, he had strong hopes that he could also match Lee and Guy in taijutsu. Finishing his push-ups, Naruto started on his sit-ups. A little ways away, Jiraiya watched his apprentice work with a frown. While he was proud of the boy for pushing himself so hard, he was also worried. Naruto had been doing nothing but training for the entire month they had started. The boy would only stop to eat and sleep. Though Jiraiya was positive the boy was only getting half as much sleep as he should. Jiraiya's original decision to take Naruto on this training trip was to focus on helping him use Kyuubi's chakra, but with the boy had been adamant on learning to fight without it, that Jiraiya had decided to focus on actual shinobi training before going to that. While the blonde had improved a good deal, going from mid-genin to about high chunin level, he would eventually crash if he kept at it. Naruto. Jiraiya called out, I want you to stop for a second and come here. Naruto looked up and nodded. Finishing his set, he stood and made his way towards Jiraiya. What do you need, Jiraiya-sensei? That was another thing that was different about their relationship. Whenever they were training, Naruto would always refer to him as sensei. Of course, once they were finished, it was right back to Aro Sennin, but at least it was progress. I want to know what's eating you, Jiraiya said, narrowing his eyes as Naruto looked away. I don't know what you're talking about, sensei, Naruto said, though he still wouldn't make eye contact. Don't give me that crap, Jiraiya scowled. You've been quiet ever since we left Konoha. In fact, you haven't been your typical loudmouth self since you got out of the hospital. Now that I think about it, I've rarely ever heard you speak more than 2 words unless it was about training. Now spill it or I won't train you anymore. Naruto winced at the obvious threat. For a moment he was silent before he sat down with a sigh. It's just, I realized just how badly I've handicapped myself all this time. When I was younger, no one would ever teach me anything. I had to learn to read and write on my own because the lady who owned the orphanage said, demons don't deserve to learn how to do human things, and when I went to the academy it was the same way. I thought that since the old man was letting me go there I would finally be able to learn and show everyone what an awesome ninja I could be if given the chance. Naruto closed his eyes. That never happened. I was always sent out during important lessons or assignments. When they taught us taijutsu I was taught incorrect stances. The list for the things they did go on. I eventually decided to stop paying attention. I played pranks so people would notice me. And by the time I found someone who was willing to teach me it was too late. I didn't care anymore. Sure, I always said I would be Hokage, but I never really worked at it. I want to change that. Jiraiya sighed as he realized what the problem was. He should have known that Sarutobi-sensei would not have been able to protect the boy like he should have. Jiraiya should have been far more adamant more about taking Naruto with him after the Kyuubi's attack. He was sure that a life on the move would have been better than a life of hatred. I suppose I can understand that, Jiraiya said, but you're still going to burn out if you keep this up. I know, Naruto sighed, but I can't help it. I want to become better. I don't want to be considered the dobi, the loser anymore. The Toad Sennin looked at his godson for a long while before a smile broke out on his face. All right then, get back to your training and I'll make sure you become the best shinobi in Konoha, if not the entire elemental nations. Naruto grinned before running back to his spot where he began exercising again. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. As soon as Naruto and Jiraiya entered the next town, the Toad Sennin immediately turned to Naruto. Listen, I'm going to go and find one of my contacts here so I can look for some information. You can wander around, just stay out of trouble, got it? He asked. Naruto rolled his eyes at the man. I'm not Uero-sensei. Jiraiya rolled his eyes at the new nickname. Apparently Naruto had decided that because Jiraiya had earned his respect he would give him the sensei title. Of course, he later told the man that because he was still a pervert he would not be removing the arrow part anytime soon. I'll be fine, I'll just go and see if this place has any ramen, maybe do some training afterwards. Whatever, brat, Jiraiya stated as he ran off. Naruto, having been with the pervert for the last month, recognized that the man was heading towards the red lights district. Informant Mai, Naruto mumbled as he began walking around town. He didn't really bother taking in the sights. Having seen one city in Fire Country, he noticed that they all kind of looked the same. Instead, he looked around at all the people. Even though he had been out of Konoha for over a month, actually having people smile at him rather than glare was a novel experience. He still was not really sure how to react, but he would occasionally return someone's smile with a tentative one of his own. As he was wandering, he noticed something else that made him curious. He had passed several groups of girls his own age, and not one to be rude to anyone really. He had offered them a smile. This had the unexpected side effect of the girls doing two things. The first was for the girls to blush at him, the second was to huddle in whatever group they were in and start giggling while looking at him. He really was not sure how to react to this. Having never had experience with girls aside from getting his face to cave in whenever Sakura hit him, he had not even touched a member of the opposite before. He did not count Tsunade Ba-chan, Shizune Ne-chan or Ayame Ne-chan, at least not without bodily harm done to him. And so he was left confused as he made his way around town, looking for a stand that would sell him some good ramen. After several minutes of searching, he finally found a stand that looked promising. He walked in and sat down at one of the stools. At the sound of his entrance, the chef turned around and spotted him. "What'll you have, kid?" Naruto frowned as he looked over the menu. I'll have 5 orders of your miso ramen, 4 orders of your chicken ramen and 2 orders of your beef ramen to start. The man behind the counter just looked at him for a second, wondering if this kid had some kind of mental deficiency. Are you sure you can eat that much, kid? He asked. Naruto looked at him with his newly created, "Do you know who you're talking to?" Look, of course I'm sure, if I wasn't I wouldn't have ordered it. The man just looked at him before shrugging, "Well, if you say so." 1 hour and 23 bowls of ramen later, Naruto left the stand leaving a very happy ramen chef and the feeling of his wallet several pounds lighter. He decided to continue his walk through the city before finding a nice quiet place to train. He wasn't too worried about getting lost. Jiraiya somehow always knew how to find him even when the man was drunk as a skunk. As he continued, Naruto noticed he was getting more and more of those looks from the female population. He was not sure what they meant, but the looks had the odd effect of making him swell with pride, and at the same time want to run away screaming. Though, he could have sworn he had seen those looks before. He shrugged the thought off as he looked at some of the stores, wanting to see if they may have anything interesting. He didn't go into any of the stores right now, since he could not see anything interesting. Instead, he satisfied himself with window shopping to see if there is something he might want. As he was looking into one of the stores, he felt someone tapping him on the shoulder. Turning around, he found himself staring at a girl around his age. She had long light brown hair, green eyes and a decent figure for someone who he recognized as a civilian. She was giving him the same smile with that light redness across the cheeks that he had noticed other girls giving him as he had walked around the city. Naruto was really not sure what to say. He had next to no experience with women, so he was completely unsure what to do. He decided to be quieter than he usually was. After all, Sakura would hit him when he was loud, so there was no reason to assume other females would not do that either. "Can I help you?" he asked. He picked up several giggles coming from behind the girl. Turning his head slightly, he saw a group of them just a little ways away looking at the two of them. He did not know why, but this instantly had his danger senses going haywire, telling him to run and never look back. The girl continued to give him a small smile. "Actually, me and my friends were just wondering if you wanted to go shopping with us." Naruto blinked, opened his mouth, closed his mouth and blinked again. No one had ever asked him to do something like this with them before. It went without saying that he was stumped on what to do. "What?" he asked in a voice that sounded like he had not heard what the girl had asked. The girl talking to him could not help but think he looked extremely cute with his confused look. She started giggling again. "I asked if you wanted to go shopping with us." Naruto, for reasons he did not know, felt his cheeks become inflamed and he was positive he looked like a tomato. This was confirmed when the girl and her friends in the distance started giggling again. Naruto thought the giggling was kind of cute, yet at the same time felt it was the single most terrifying thing in existence. He was tempted to just run and hope these girls could not find him again to ask him, yet at the same time he had never actually spent time with anyone his own age outside of the academy and missions. "Sure. I'd love to with you," Naruto said as he gave the girl his megawatt smile. After all, it would be nice to hang out with people his own age just to be with them instead of on a mission or training. That was the wrong thing to say. Naruto was unsure what had happened, but he soon found himself being dragged by the arm to nearly every store in the city. The girls did not do any shopping, however they had decided to see what kind of clothes he liked to see them in. Apparently they wanted a guy's opinion or something. He wasn't quite sure since they were talking so fast it was next to impossible to understand them. In any case, every store they went to, the girls would grab a bunch of clothes, change into them and model for him while asking for his opinion. Naruto, having never done anything even remotely like this before, was completely unsure what to say to them. Instead, he found himself spending that time blushing and trying to speak, only for no words to actually come out, or for his words to sound more like he was choking on a piece of food. Unfortunately for him, rather than irritate them, This seemed to endear the group of females he was hanging out with even further. They began calling him cute and asking him things like if he had a girlfriend. One was even bold enough to ask if she could touch his whiskers. Luckily, help arrived. As he was walking down the street, two of the girls having somehow latched onto each of his arms, Naruto noticed a large dust cloud being kicked up and coming his way. He and the girls stopped and watched as Jiraiya passed with a horde of barely clothed women coming at him with bats, pitchforks and many other devices used to maim and cripple, all the while yelling about perverts and getting what he deserved. As soon as they passed, Naruto got out of the girl's grip and turned to them. Sorry for cutting this short, but it looks like I have to save my perverted sensei from his rightful execution. With nary another word, Naruto was gone, leaving the girls to watch the second, smaller cloud of dust he made. Naruto found Jiraiya just as he assumed he would have, lying unconscious and twitching as the women walked away after beating him. Walking up the blonde toad, the spastically twitching toad Sennin, a second later said Sennin jumped up and dusted himself off as if nothing had even happened. I knew you weren't going to be meeting any contact, Arrow-sensei, Naruto said once the man was up. Stupid pervert, why can't you ever just act normal? Normal is overrated, Gaki, Jiraiya exclaimed as a smirk formed on his face. Besides, you have no right to talk. I saw all those females you were with. I have to say I'm quite impressed. His smirk turned into a lecherous grin as he saw Naruto's face turn beet red. It's not like that, you goddamn pervert, Naruto shouted, pointing a finger at his sensei. They asked me to go shopping with them, and I was just trying to be nice. Oh ho, so they came on to you, Jiraiya wiped away a fake tear. My student is growing up so fast, to have women asking him to spend with them. Shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, Naruto shouted, covering his ears. Now don't be like that, Gaki, Jiraiya said with a grin. It's quite impressive what you did. In fact, I'm so impressed that I'm going to give you some tips on how to please women. As the two went to the hotel Jiraiya had rented before deciding to do his research, Naruto was forced to listen to his sensei giving him tips on how to please a woman. He tried not to listen to the man, knowing that all he was talking about was some perverted crap that he did not want to know. However, he somehow found himself listening anyways. Half of it he didn't even understand, having been sent out of class during the UAL education course he did not actually know about. Even his infamous Orochi no Jutsu, Waijutsu, was merely the byproduct of having seen the front cover of Ika Ika when he caught Oji-san reading it several times. Jiraiya had finished talking by the time they reached their room, and Naruto, being Naruto, used his way with words to form a comprehensible and well thought out sentence after listening. What the hell are you talking about, Arrow-sensei? What in the hell is a? Is that like a cat? 'Cause I seriously hate cats. Naruto shivered as he remembered his horrendous times with Tora. Jiraiya looked at Naruto as if he had sprouted wings and grown several tails. Are you telling me you've never heard that word? Shouldn't you know this stuff? Kami, I thought they would have taught at least a little UAL education in the academy. Naruto blinked. I think they did mention something about it once. He frowned as he tried to remember if they had a class on that. And you didn't listen? Jiraiya asked, sounding for all the world frustrated. The kid had been getting a lot better at being a ninja. He acted smarter too. Jiraiya was sure the boy was not as dumb as he acted, or used to act to a certain extent. But about other things he seemed he was still an idiot about. Naruto looked down at his feet. Well, I would have, but I didn't have Iruka as a teacher back then. They sent me out, telling me that because of my pranks the other day I didn't deserve to know about this. Jiraiya found himself frowning. He had learned a while ago that because many of the teachers had been biased against Naruto due to the fox, that they would often send him out during important lessons in class. It was part of the reason Naruto had next to no knowledge about being a shinobi. What about your Orochi no Jutsu? Jiraiya asked. How did you come up with that if you had no knowledge of UAL education? Oh, that, Naruto said in a dismissive tone. I saw Oji-san reading that perverted book of yours and saw the cover. I got the idea from that. But the girl in the front cover isn't, Jiraiya said. Naruto tilted his head to the side. Neither is mine. What do you think that smoke covering is for? Jiraiya found himself feeling stupid as he heard that. He had assumed that the smoke covering had been used to tantalize the person Naruto used it on into wanting more. Apparently from what Naruto was saying that was not the case, and the only reason the smoke was there was because Naruto did not know enough about female anatomy to actually create those parts. This meant that his apprentice knew next to nothing about, or the opposite. It was both fortunate and unfortunate that Naruto happened to be with a man who made his living off of books that were little better than porn. Alright Naruto, Jiraiya said as he pulled out his first edition of Ika Ika Volume 1, I'm going to be teaching you all you need to know about women. As soon as Naruto saw the little orange book he knew he had to escape, he shot towards the window, hoping to make a quick exit. However Jiraiya was far faster than he was. Before the blonde even knew what was happening he found himself being tied to a chair and trying not to stare or listen to his sensei as he talked about and used his perverted book as a reference. His screams and pleas could be heard all throughout the night. The next day found Naruto at the library, looking up knowledge on females and he had been forced to listen to his damn sensei for more than half of the night. Now he felt like he had been scarred for life. However the Toad Senin's talk had also made him curious. Jiraiya had told him a lot, but he also felt that the man had left a lot out. After all he had only focused on the perverted parts about. So here Naruto was, along with several clones, reading books on human anatomy, the reproductive system and intimate relationships in general. He had even gotten a few romance novels, hoping it would help him understand more about women and relationships with the opposite in general. After all there was no way he was going to let his sensei corrupt him with his perverted ways. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. 6 months later. Naruto grunted as he was kicked in the face and sent flying backwards. Flipping himself in mid-air Naruto landed on his feet and skidded across the water. In burst of speed Naruto shot off towards Jiraiya, one hand going to his kunai pouch and the other began a series of one-handed seals. He threw several shuriken at Jiraiya before thrusting out his palm. Fuden. Ripusho. Wind release. Wind gale palm. The shuriken which had already been going forward at high speed soon became a nothing more than a streak of silver as they head for Jiraiya. The Toad Senin jumped out of the way, knowing how dangerous Naruto was when he used his wind element for anything. However Naruto knew his sensei would dodge. After all Jiraiya was not a cage-level shinobi for nothing and had in fact counted on him dodging. Naruto put in a small but intense burst of highly concentrated chakra into his legs, literally disappearing and reappearing right in front of Jiraiya. The blonde shinobi aimed a punch at his sensei's solar plexus. Jiraiya swatted it to the side and downward in the hopes of knocking Naruto off balance. No such luck as Naruto went down and pushed himself into a handstand, launching a kick that managed to hit Jiraiya in the face and make the man stumble back. Pushing himself into a flip Naruto went for an axe kick to Jiraiya's collarbone. Jiraiya put up both arms to guard and immediately regretted it as he was forced to a knee. Goddamn Gaki and his stupid strength training. Jiraiya grabbed onto Naruto's legs with both hands and was about to flip the boy over. However Naruto used his other leg to jump up and over Jiraiya, using the man's grip to keep himself balanced and launched a kick to the white-haired man's face. Jiraiya was forced to let go of Naruto's leg as he tilted his head to the side and dodged the kick. He turned around and managed to kick Naruto in the chest on the blonde's way down, said boy moving with the blow and going into a series of flips as he jumped away to gain some distance. Jiraiya took out a kunai and threw it at the blonde, going through a few hand seals as he shouted. Ninpu. Kunai Kage Bushin no Jutsu. Ninja Art. Kunai Shadow Clone Jutsu. One kunai multiplied into 24 kunai as they all headed straight for Naruto, said blonde just looked at them with a smirk. Going through a few of his own hand seals before Naruto called out his jutsu. Sweden. Sujinheki. Water release. Water encampment wall. A large wall of water formed around Naruto, blocking the kunai. Once Naruto heard the popping of kunai being dispelled, and he went through several more hand seals. Suiden. Saryuden no Jutsu. Water release. Water Dragon Jutsu. The wall of water soon began to swirl around Naruto, before taking the shape of a 60-foot water dragon with glowing yellow eyes. As soon as it did, Naruto created a cage bushin seamlessly and had it go through a few hand seals as the water dragon launched itself towards Jiraiya. Fuden. Rinkuden. Wind release. Wind bullet. The clone smashed a fist into its stomach and shot a large ball of compressed wind out of its mouth. It went straight for the water dragon. The water dragon's power and speed were soon increased as the Rinkuden merged with it as it headed towards Jiraiya, said Sennin, swearing enough to make a sailor blush as he jumped out of the way. The water dragon slammed into the water with a loud crash. Water erupted everywhere, looking something akin to a large explosion. Using the distraction caused by his jutsu, Naruto threw several kunai and went through the hand signs Jiraiya had used earlier. Ninpu. Kunai Cage Bushin no Jutsu. Ninja Art. Kunai Shadow Clone Jutsu. 1 kunai became 41 kunai as they headed for the still airborne Jiraiya. Noticing the kunai, the Toad Sennin went through his own hand seals to counter. Ninpu. Hari Jizu. Ninja Art. Underworld Guardian Spikes. Jiraiya's hair wrapped around his body and became hard as steel as it deflected the kunai. When all the kunai were gone, Jiraiya whipped his still long hair around and called out another jutsu. Ninpu. Keisenban. Ninja Art. Hair Senban. Several hardened needles of hair were launched at Naruto, who took out 2 kunai. Spinning them by the rings, he went into his taijutsu stance with both kunai held in a cross guard. Naruto's hands soon became a blur of motion as he deflected the hair Senban away. Whatever he couldn't deflect was dodged as Naruto flipped and twirled in an amazing acrobatic display. When the Senban hailstorm died down, Naruto looked around, not seeing Jiraiya anywhere. He frowned before closing his eyes, trying to sense out the man's chakra. Having felt Jiraiya's chakra signature for 6 months now, Naruto could pick it up fairly easily. He finally found him, however, his eyes widened when he realized the man was right under him. His realization came too late as Jiraiya came out of the water and smashed a fist right into Naruto's chin. Before Naruto could fly too far, he felt hair wrap around his body and harden, immobilizing him. Jiraiya grinned at his student, who was currently hanging upside down. The boy had come quite far in just 6 months. His physical abilities and taijutsu were now extremely impressive, definitely high Jonin level with all the work they had been doing to bring it up to snuff. His chakra control was also coming along nicely, being at around mid-Jonin level. Which was good, especially considering the fact that it grew at a near constant rate. However, it was Naruto's ninjutsu that took the biggest leap, particularly in the field of elemental manipulation. Jiraiya had decided that since the boy was doing so well, they would get started on learning elemental nature manipulation, something that Jiraiya had planned on having Kakashi teach the kid when they returned. Now he was glad that he didn't go through with that plan. Since Naruto appeared to have 3 elements, Fuden wind, Suiden water, and Raiden lightning. It had been a shocking discovery, and Jiraiya had to wonder if it was some kind of bloodline or if it just came from his parents. Minato had been a Fuden user starting out, but had later learned to use Raiden during the Third Great Ninja War. And Kushina had an affinity for Suiden jutsu, so he supposed it was possible, but it still didn't make much sense. He actually planned on having Naruto tested when they returned to Konoha in 3 years. If he did have a Kekkei Genkai of some kind, it could cause problems. Jiraiya shook his head. He would worry about that later. Nice job, Gaki, but you're still too early to beat me. Naruto gave Jiraiya a pout before it turned into a grin that instantly put the Sennin on guard. Oh really? Naruto asked right as Jiraiya's eyes widened. Shit. Jiraiya jumped out of the way just in time to dodge a large explosion as the now identified cage bushin he was holding blew itself up. As Jiraiya landed, he felt cold steel against his neck. He couldn't help but chuckle. You've been waiting to use that tactic, haven't you? Naruto grinned as he put his kunai away. Well, yeah, you tend to immobilize me a lot with those hair techniques of yours, so I figured it would be a good way to beat you. Jiraiya nodded as they had sparred quite often. By now it was obvious that Naruto would know Jiraiya's tactics. That was going to be an issue since others would not fight like he did, nor would they pull their punches. He would need to have Naruto gain some experience. Maybe he could see if Tsunade would give them some missions to accomplish. You're getting better, Jiraiya complimented as he thought about how to give Naruto some real-life experience. Anyways, let's set up camp for the night. Tomorrow we'll head into a town a little ways off. Alright, Ero-sensei, Naruto said as he grabbed several scrolls from his kunai pouches. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Hey Ero-sensei, Naruto said as the two sat around a campfire. What is gaki? He asked as he took some meat off the spit over the fire and began to eat. I was wondering, Naruto started as he ate some of his own food, do you think that it's possible for me to bring Sasuke back? Jiraiya sighed. He had expected this to come up soon. Naruto had recently been getting quiet and contemplative again, which had not happened since the first month of their training. He also knew about the kid's promise, that pink-haired girl who the kid had a crush on, though judging by the amount of times he had caught Naruto talking and even flirting with other girls now, he was sure that crush would be gone soon. He resisted the urge to give a perverted giggle at that thought before speaking. I'll be honest with you, Naruto. Even if you brought Sasuke back, it would only cause more problems. Sasuke is like Orochimaru in many ways. He desires power and will do anything he can to get it. I don't need to remind you of how he had nearly killed you trying to leave for that traitor. If you brought Sasuke back, it would just cause him to resent you and Konoha more. He left because he felt that the village and his friendship with you was holding him back. If you did succeed in forcing him back, he would only hate you more for trying to block him from gaining power. Naruto's shoulders slumped. So you're saying I should forget about him? Jiraiya patted the boy on the shoulder. I know it's hard. Hell, when I tried to bring Orochimaru back and failed, I was just as hurt as you were. But being a shinobi, and especially if you want to be Hokage, means that you sometimes have to make hard decisions. Naruto nodded to himself. It had been on his mind a lot recently. He had a feeling that this would be the case but had wanted a second opinion. He didn't like it. He had wanted to bring his best friend back, but if that was not possible, it would be better to forget about him. I understand, Naruto said with some conviction. I was wondering, do you think we could extend the training trip? Jiraiya blinked in surprise as he answered, well, I don't see why not. Jiraiya smiled at the thought of all the things he could teach Naruto if they stayed longer. I had originally planned for a 4-year trip anyway. This will allow me to teach you much more, and with your Kage Bushin you could easily be Kage level by the time we return to Konoha. Naruto grinned as he finished eating and threw the stick his food was on away. He felt as if a small weight had been lifted off of him. Before Naruto went to sleep, he made a vow that he would train to become the greatest shinobi ever. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Naruto sighed as he looked at the blank piece of paper in front of him and wondered how he got roped into doing this. I can't believe I let Ero-sennin somehow convinced me to write a book, he thought with a sigh as he remembered the bet he had made with his perverted sensei. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Flashback. Naruto and Jiraiya were currently arguing again. Many people would probably wonder what the two could be arguing about. The answer was quite simple. Jiraiya had just been caught peeping again, and because Naruto needed his sensei to teach him, he had ended up bailing the fool out, again. This was the 1,700,560th time that Naruto had been forced to do this, and he was getting sick of it. Sweet Kami Ero-sensei, can you for just once in your life not go peeping in the hot spring and act like a pervert? Naruto yelled in the middle of the heavily populated city in Tasuki no Kuni, Land of Fangs. Shish, Jiraiya whispered as he looked around, seeing many of the women currently glaring at him. Keep it down, brat. You're gonna make it harder for me to do my research if you yell like that and alert all the ladies. Good, maybe if they don't go to the hot springs you won't go peeping, Naruto stated. Then perhaps you can actually write a good book that's not perverted. Hey, are you saying my books are bad? Did I stutter? You damn brat, my books are the best and everyone with half a brain knows it. Then how come all the women absolutely hate your books? Asked Naruto, who grinned when he got a glare from his sensei. Besides, I could write a book that would sell 1,000 times more copies than your perverted crap. Ho ho, that's a good one, Gaki. Would you care to bet on that? What are the wages? Jiraiya went into a thinking pose. If I win, you will not only have to keep helping me out when I get caught doing research, but also use your Oroki no Jutsu, Jutsu, to help give me some material as well. Fine, and if I win, you have to not only stop being perverted as long as you're still training me, but also. Naruto thought about what else he wanted for a moment before giving a smile that sent shivers down Jiraiya's spine. Tell me about my father. Jiraiya nearly choked on his own spit when he heard that. He had in all honesty been planning on telling him after his training was complete. Telling him at this stage could be detrimental since his father had many enemies. Right now Naruto was only at low to mid Jonin since shadow clones could not be used for physical training and he lacked experience. Not only that, but Naruto might get angry at his father and end up hating the man for sealing Kyuubi inside of him. On the other hand, it could prove to be beneficial and give Naruto something of a measuring stick, making him push himself harder in order to surpass his father. Though he was already pushing himself far more than others could. Jiraiya sighed as he figured it couldn't hurt. Alright brat, you've got yourself a bet, Jiraiya said, holding out his hand. If your book ends up selling more than mine, I'll stop peeping until your training is over and tell you about your father. Naruto grinned as he took Jiraiya's hand. This would be no problem. Flashback end. XXXXXXXXXXXXXX. Damn, this is harder than I thought, Naruto mumbled to himself. Having fun, brat. Naruto turned to see Jiraiya grinning at him. Naruto favored him with a glare but said nothing, which only caused Jiraiya to grin more. Moving to look over his student's shoulder, he decided to push the blonde shinobi's buttons. My Naruto, look at all that writing you have done, Jiraiya said with evident sarcasm. I'm sure you'll have a book that beats mine in no time with such a great material. Shut up, Naruto growled. Not as easy as it looks, is it? Asked Jiraiya in a taunting tone. Naruto abruptly stood up and left, not looking back as he heard his sensei laughing. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Naruto sighed as he slammed the now empty bottle of sake on the table before ordering another. Sake had become something he found he enjoyed drinking, especially since he couldn't get drunk and just enjoy its taste thanks to the Kyuubi. Hey there, handsome, do you mind if I join you? Naruto looked up to see a woman standing in front of him. She was about 5 feet 6 inches and wearing a red and black kimono. She had a fairly nice hourglass figure with nice curves and firm round S. She had black hair and emerald green eyes as well as pale milky skin. All in all, Naruto found the woman to be very beautiful. Naruto grinned at her, pleased with the small compliment she had given him. He had of course been called handsome before by other women he had interacted with, but it was still good to hear. Naruto had changed a lot since leaving a year ago. At 13 years old he now stood at a height of 5 feet 7 inches, having hit a rather spontaneous growth spurt about 6 months ago, about a month after he and Jiraiya left on this training trip. His body was also more defined. Even with the civilian clothing he was currently wearing, it was rather easy to see the strain denoting to his well-defined pectoral muscles, abdominal muscles and arms. His face had chiseled out as well, having lost most of his baby fat with his harsh training, giving it a masculine look. Add on the whiskers and he had what many girls had described as roguish good looks mixed in with feral appeal. How could I possibly refuse such a beautiful woman's company? Naruto asked rhetorically with a charming smile. The woman smiled at him as he ordered a drink for her while she sat down. Thank you, it's hard to find good company these days, she said, looking around at the various tables. Naruto looked around too and realized what she meant. Everywhere he looked, men were eyeing her with lust. I see what you mean, he started before giving her a sly look. Though I do hope that you're not just using me as a shield, Naruto affected a mock-hurt expression. The woman giggled slightly. Of course not, she started before pausing in thought. Well, not completely. You seem like decent company. I'm quite good at detecting gentlemen who would actually be able to hold a conversation without looking below my face. That seems like quite a talent to have, Naruto said as he favored her with his patented, foxy, grin. A beautiful woman such as yourself must be used to sensing perverts rather easily. Naruto and the young woman talked for about an hour. Mostly he would ask her questions about herself while regaling her with the things he had seen on his travels, being careful to leave out his status as a ninja. He learned her name was Aiko Miyake, and much to his surprise she lived in Yuki no Kuni, Snow Country, one of the countries he had saved, which was now called Haru no Kuni, Spring Country. She was apparently here on business, working as a trader for some of Haru's technology, which Naruto knew was more advanced than anything else in the elemental countries. Naruto would also throw in the occasional subtle compliment that made the young woman blush. He was quite pleased with himself for that accomplishment. Since his first encounter with that group of girls a little over 6 months ago, Naruto had made an effort to get better at speaking with women. He would never go to Jiraiya for advice, of course. After that night where the Sennin had tried to teach him, Naruto had been scarred for life. However, he had read up on intimate and UAL relations, as well as books that talked about girls in general and several romance novels. He never really liked them but felt they helped. As he continued meeting different women in the elemental nations, Naruto found himself actually enjoying spending time and flirting with various women. He could at least partially understand Ero-sensei's obsession with them, even if he felt the man took it too far with his peeping. Aiko herself was pleased that Naruto was actually listened to her. She found herself blushing many times as Naruto used his charm and gave her subtle compliments, and not just about her figure. It was definitely a pleasant change to people either putting her down for doing what some considered a man's job or only trying to get in her pants. It also helped that she was downing more sake than usual since she felt so comfortable in his presence. When it was time to go, Naruto noticed that she was having a little trouble standing up. She had obviously drunken too much. Deciding to do the gentlemanly thing, he offered her support as he took her back to her hotel. Of course, nothing ever goes right when you're with a young beautiful woman at night, and the two soon found themselves surrounded by several thugs. "Look what we have here, boys," one of the thugs exclaimed. "That's quite the woman you have there, boy. Too much woman for a scrawny thing like you," another commented. "Just hand over the woman and all your valuables and we may let you leave," the one on his right stated as he pulled out a knife. Aiko, while drunk, was sober enough to realize the danger she was in and pressed herself against Naruto. Naruto just sighed. What was it with all thugs being arrogant fools? Deciding to be quick, he created a shadow clone to keep Aiko standing while he launched himself at the thugs. He appeared right in front of the first thug and hit him square in the solar plexus with enough force to send him flying down the road, breaking a few ribs in the process. The other thugs looked in surprise before it turned to anger and they charged him. The one with the knife tried to stab him, but Naruto deftly moved out the way and grabbed the man's arm, hitting it right where the elbow joint was, breaking it. Ignoring the man's scream of pain, he spun 180 degrees and launched snap kick at the other man's left kneecap, breaking that before hitting the man in the neck, knocking him unconscious. When that was done, he moved over to the young woman who was looking at him with something akin to awe, respect, and lust. "Are you all right?" Naruto asked as he walked up to the woman. "Of course I am, thanks to you," she purred out as she grabbed his arm and pressed it into the valley of her. Naruto tried hard to ignore that as he walked to the hotel. She gave him directions to and walked her to her room. "Thank you for escorting me, Naruto-kun," Aiko said. Naruto grinned as he scratched the back of his head. It was nothing really, I was just doing the right thing." Aiko gave him a coy and seductive smile as she leaned into him, wrapping her arms around his neck and pulling him close. I think such behavior deserves a reward, she said. Naruto shivered as her breath hit his lips and found himself getting rather stiff in his lower region. What kind of re? His question was cut off. Aiko pressed her lips against his. For several seconds Naruto found himself frozen stiff. While he had kissed women before, it was always him to initiate it. Thankfully instincts began to take over as he started kissing back. As Aiko moaned into the kiss, Naruto licked her lips asking permission to enter. When she opened her mouth to grant him entrance and he tentatively probed her mouth. Wrapping his arms around Aiko, he became more emboldened as she moaned into his kiss. Naruto soon found himself in Aiko's room, pressing the beautiful young woman against the wall as their kissing became more impassioned. Aiko moaned as Naruto brought his mouth away from hers and began to lick, nip and bite her neck. The young woman began to pant as she grabbed fistfuls of his hair and started to grind herself against Naruto's increasing bulge. It wasn't long after that they found themselves on her bed, where both of them eventually lost their clothes. Not that either cared at this point, as passion and lust had taken an inexplicable hold over the pair. Naruto had one last thought before he completely succumbed to his growing lust. Thank Kami, I learned an anti-pregnancy jutsu from that medical book. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Naruto held in a groan as the light from the window hit his eyes. Opening them slowly, he realized that he was in an unfamiliar room. He nearly panicked before he started to think rationally. Last night was fairly hazy and the last thing he remembered was escorting Aiko to her apartment. It was then he heard a content sigh and felt something trying to burrow its way deeper into his well-muscled chest. Looking down, he saw a mop of messy black hair. That's when he remembered last night. He couldn't help but blush at remember what had happened. After Aiko had kissed him, they had found themselves giving into the feelings of passion. He remembered having with the young woman for 4 hours straight before they had pretty much passed out in her bed, as well as all the positions they had done it in. Naruto was actually surprised with himself, not just the fact that he had been deflowered, but also that he had lasted so long, though he was also quite proud of himself. The blonde had been curious about for a while, ever since he created his Orochi no Jutsu actually, and when he left to go on the training trip he had decided that this was his chance to learn. Of course he didn't want to go to Jiraiya knowing the pervert would completely corrupt him, so he did the only thing he could. He picked up multiple books and read. One of the things he read was that most men do not last long, especially their first time. Though Naruto always did have high stamina, so maybe it was just brought over to his drive. He heard a groan as Aiko stirred in his arms before lifting her head up and rubbing her eyes. Good morning, Aiko-chan, Naruto said, hoping that he would not get beaten for what happened. Sometimes women could become violent and she had been drunk so she might not even remember last night. Aiko looked at him and for a moment Naruto was afraid he was going to be on the receiving end of the female fist of fury. However, she just gave him a saucy smile. Good morning to you too, Naruto-kun, I hope you enjoyed last night. Naruto gave an internal sigh of relief as he grinned at her. I had a very good time last night. I hope that you enjoyed it as well. Naruto's answer was a steaming kiss on the lips, which soon turned into a small makeout session. It lasted for a while before Naruto realized he had to go or Jiraiya might start searching for him, and the last thing he needed was that pervert to see this. Deciding to thank her for the amazing night, he had several clones clean her sheets while he cooked her breakfast. The breakfast itself was fairly simple: eggs, bacon and French toast with a side of orange juice. Aiko, however, loved it, stating that it was the most delicious breakfast she ever had. One of the things Naruto had learned recently was how to cook. He found it was something he loved doing and was really good at blending spices and food. What he would consider a normal meal for him was apparently something that tasted like Kami had blessed it for others. When breakfast was over, Naruto thanked her again and gave her another intimate kiss before making his way to his own hotel. When Naruto got in, he noticed that Jiraiya was passed out on his futon, and several sake bottles littered the floor. Naruto however ignored this as he went to his blank sheets of paper and began writing. Last night had strangely enough done wonders to clear his head. He found that he had several ideas for a story and so he began writing. He idly wondered if having was the cause of his clear mind or if it was something else. Humming a little tune he began to write. When the war of the beasts brings about the world's end, the goddess descends from the sky. Wings of light and dark spread afar. She guides us to bliss, her gift everlasting. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. 2 months later. I can't believe, Jiraiya mumbled as he cried anime tears. Believe it, Ero-sensei. You lost, Naruto stated with a shit-eating grin. But, no buts, Naruto wagged his finger at the depressed Toad Sage. Naruto's book had just been published a little over a week ago. Naruto had titled it Loveless and brought it to Jiraiya's publisher. After looking at what Naruto had written, the publisher had decided to put the book on the market. The results had shocked both Jiraiya and Naruto. Within the first few days the book had swept across the elemental nations by storm, beating out all 3 Ika books in sales and was still getting more popular. Jiraiya looked at the sales his student's book got and couldn't help but feel depressed. Naruto's book had earned a higher sales rate than his own books. Not only that, but there was not one mention of smutty goodness in it. It was inconceivable, impossible, and yet here it was right in front of him. Come on, you pervy old man, a deal's a deal. Jiraiya looked at him before he grumbled about never betting against blonde gakis who are too talented for their own good again as he handed him a scroll. Naruto looked at the scroll before looking back at Jiraiya with an eyebrow raised in question. It's from your father. In case something ever happened to him, I was told to give this to you when I felt you were ready, Jiraiya explained. That was all Naruto needed as he opened the scroll and began to read its contents. After the first few sentences, Naruto's emotions started to slip. His lips quivered and tears ran down his eyes as what he had suspected for a while now was confirmed. He didn't know whether to be happy, sad, angry, or elated. Jiraiya watched his student's face flash through various emotions and became worried when the blonde's face became blank. It was the look Naruto would get when they were sparring and showed none of what he was feeling. Naruto? Jiraiya asked in an unsure voice. He was not used to these kinds of things. Despite having been through 2 great wars, Jiraiya had always had a problem at helping others with their emotional problems. He himself always preferred to get smashed and find a woman to have with. Suffice to say, he didn't think that would work for Naruto. A small crack appeared in Naruto's facade. I'm going to the hotel. I need to be alone for a while. Naruto left rather quickly. Jiraiya looked up at the sky and sighed. He was not sure if this was the best idea, but only time would tell. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Naruto sat in his room as he reread the message his father had left him. Dear Naruto, I bet you're wondering who this is. Nay. My name is Minato Namikaze and I went by many names. The Konoha no Kuroi Senku, Yellow Flash of Konoha, and Yondaime Hokage were a few, but the one I am most proud of is father. Specifically your father. Your old man's pretty cool, right? Now onto why I am writing this. It's really a just-in-case kind of thing. Despite winning the war, there are many people out there who want me dead, and I'm not arrogant enough to assume that one might not get lucky. I am leaving this letter with Jiraiya, my sensei and your godfather. Should anything happen to me or your mom Kushina, he is the one who will take care of you. I told him to give this to you when he feels you're ready. Now that the boring stuff is over with, I have some things to give you that I felt were too important to keep at home. On the bottom of this letter is a seal that is specifically designed to open with Namikaze blood, meaning only myself or you can open it, seeing as how we are the only Namikazes. Inside this seal you will several important things, the first being one of my Hiraishin kunai. Note that these will not work for you because of a specific blood seal that is tied to me and only me. The Hiraishin is simply too powerful a tool to use without taking great precaution to ensure it does not get replicated, but this should be a good basis for you to make your own Shiki formula, for your own Hiraishin is the key to the formula created. without it you won't be able to see all the seals on the kanai. The last and just as important are my notes on the Horizon. They are not complete since I figured that if you're anything like me you will want a challenge, but they should give you a basis to start with. If I die, I hope that this letter lets you know that I love you and hope that this can in some way bring us closer as father and son. Love your father. Minato Namikaze. Naruto gritted his teeth as he tried to stop the tears from coming, but it was no use, and he soon found himself crying. It was both in joy and in anger. Joy at knowing he had a father who cared about enough to come up with a precaution in case something happened to him, to ensure that he would be able to protect himself and let him know that his father did in fact love him. And anger at the fact that it was his father, the man he had considered a hero since he was little and listened to Oji-san tell stories of him, was the same man who condemned him to a life of hell and loneliness for 12 years of his life. He was always pretty cautious when it came to you. Naruto turned around to see Jiraiya leaning in the doorway, his arms crossed and a rare serious expression on his face. What? Naruto asked as if he had not heard what the man had said. He made that for you the moment he found out Kushina was pregnant. Jiraiya continued, sitting down on the edge of the bed. I don't think I've ever seen him or Kushina as happy as they had been when they heard she was going to have a baby. So I should just forgive and forget? Naruto asked in a low voice, just move on like that because he was happy I was being born. I've lived in loneliness and pain for 12 years of my life because my own father sealed a giant 9-tailed demon fox in my gut. Maybe you can forgive something like that so easily, but I can't, Godfather. Jiraiya winced at the way Naruto said the man's title. Jiraiya knew he had not been much of a godfather to the blonde. He could have disobeyed his sensei and the council, taking Naruto with him and nurturing the boy into the man he should have been, but he had not done that. Naruto, I wanted to tea. And where were you? Naruto accused, having cut off Jiraiya's speech. You were supposed to take care of me should anything happen to my parents. Where were you when the orphanage kicked me out and I was forced to live on the streets for a year? Where were you when I received my first beating by the villagers on my own birthday? Naruto, look, what were you doing, huh? Peeking on women so you could write those perverted book of yours and not accept the responsibility for your godson. Look here, Jiraiya yelled as he stood up and narrowed his eyes at Naruto, I wanted to take you with me. In fact, I begged Sarutobi-sensei to let me take you away from the village. I pleaded with him, but he wouldn't budge. He said he wanted you to gain bonds with the people of the village. I told him that it would never happen, but he wouldn't listen. Jiraiya took a deep breath and calmed down. Sitting back down, he placed a hand on the young boy's shoulder. If it had been my choice, I would have taken you with me, but it wasn't. And it's not like I didn't come to see how you were doing. What do you mean? Naruto asked, having calmed down a bit, though tears were still falling freely down his face. Who do you think gave you that wallet? Jiraiya asked, gesturing towards the seal on Naruto's leg that held Gama-chan. Naruto blinked. You gave it to me. But I thought that it was Sarutobi-sensei. Jiraiya shook his head. Had it been him, he would have given it in person. Why didn't you give it to me in person? The council. Jiraiya sighed. By the time I came back to visit you and saw how shitty your life was, I begged sensei to again let me take you out of the village. However, the council had taken much of the Hokage's power after Minato's death. By that time, sensei was unable to do anything. I was ordered not to make contact with you unless it had something to do with the seal. Naruto rubbed his eyes with his arms, getting the tears out before he looked at Jiraiya with a smile. I guess I'll have to fix that when I become Hokage, nay. Jiraiya chuckled as he ruffled Naruto's hair. I guess so, but you won't become Hokage by moping about like this. Naruto chuckled as he dried the last of his tears. He honestly felt better after crying a bit. But crying never got people anywhere, plus crying over spilt milk wasn't his style. He was just about to comment when he remembered something. What about my mother? From what I understand, she wrote a letter for you as well, but it's at their house in Konoha, Jiraiya answered. Naruto nodded. Then I won't worry about that for now. I'll be able to read it when I get home. Jiraiya nodded and smiled. Good, now if you're done moping we have some training to do. Naruto grinned. Right. XXXXXXXXXXXX. 3 months later. Naruto looked out at all the clones he had created after finishing his physical training regime. He had gone from 200 to 300 and had them working on various things. Most of which were elemental manipulation, more specifically trying to find a way to combine them. He had just mastered his lightning element just a month ago, with it being the last natural affinity he had, so he had gone on to try something harder. Currently he had 100 clones working on sub-elemental creation. Contrary to popular belief, sub-elements were not the result of a bloodline. While there were of course elemental bloodlines, they usually centered around specific techniques such as Haku's Haijutsu Maku Haosho, demonic ice mirrors. There were also bloodlines that had specific powers that were used through sub-elements, such as Hashirama Senju's ability to tame the Biju. Otherwise the shinobi he ran into in Yuki would never have had the Hyoten Jutsu, ice techniques, that they had been known for before it became Haru no Kuni, Spring Country, after Team 7 saved it. Even though they only manipulated pre-existing ice, it still took the ability to combine water and wind elements to form the shapes they wanted. Anyone with enough control over their two elements and sufficient chakra control could create sub-elements. Of course some were harder than others. Naruto had even heard rumors that there was a person who could use Yoden, lava release, which was a combination of fire and earth elements, and Futen, boil release, which was combining two contradictory elements, fire and water, to create an acidic base that could melt a person's opponents. He was unsure how the Kekkei Genkai worked for that person, but he assumed it allowed for a subconscious act of coating the walls of the throat with a layer of protective chakra. So far Naruto had only been able to create Hyoten, but he was hoping to see if he could combine more than just WND and water. Another 100 were working on a mix of Tai and Kenjutsu katas, after Naruto had decided it would be good to learn how to use a weapon other than kunai and shuriken. Despite not having any style to go off of right now, Jiraiya had told him he was pretty good with a sword. It was Naruto's hope that he would be able to create his own style, like his taijutsu style, which he had learned was his father's style. The kenjutsu relied on high-speed combat. Though rather than aim for joints, nerves and delivering bone-crushing blows, this style was designed to kill, going for the 8 vital points in the human body. Its movement was also based off of his affinity with wind and water. The style was meant to flow, so to speak. The user would move like the water, flowing in and out of attacks like water flows around a rock. However, it was also fast and unpredictable like the wind. It could be calm and centered one moment, then have all the power and fury of a raging hurricane the next. Right now the sword he was using was one he had custom made when he and Jiraiya had gone to Tetsu no Kuni, Iron Country, a country which had been considered autonomous for many years and was well known for their powerful samurai force. The blade was a total of 2 inches 6 in length, making it a Kodachi class weapon, with a pitch black finish while the edge was a vibrant silver color. The guard was that of the Uzumaki swirl, made to look like it was made of 9 fox tails in a dark orange color. The handle was also wrapped up in a dark orange cloth, with a gold pommel at the end and 3 tassels on the bottom. The sword was made out of a powerful chakra-conducting metal that was found only in Tetsu no Kuni. It was the same metal that allowed that nation's samurai to launch chakra-based attacks from the blade. It was also very expensive to have made. Along the edge of the blade were several powerful and hidden seal arrays of Naruto's own design. Their purpose was to store elemental chakra so he could launch elemental attacks rather than the standard chakra attacks to give him an edge in battle. He also gave the sword what he called a chakra circulatory seal. What this did was give the sword its very own chakra system, complete with artificial tenketsu points that were bonded to Naruto's own chakra coils. This allowed Naruto to utilize more power if the seals ran out of chakra in battle. It was based off of the few things he had heard about on the Samahata, a semi-sentient blade that could absorb foreign chakra. Though Naruto's was not semi-sentient, it was connected to Naruto in a way that most swordsmen would never be with their swords. he had given it the name Susanoo, God of Storms. The last 100 clones were doing a variety of different things, most of which were reading. Naruto had found an immense desire to learn after wanting to change himself. He would read anything from tactics and shinobi history to politics and gardening, not limiting himself to just shinobi-related subjects. However, other clones were doing things like playing shogi to help work on strategy, jotting down notes on ideas for a new jutsu or seal, or even trying to create a new seal. Though those ones had to be replenished often as they usually had rather explosive results. Naruto turned his attention back to the notes in his hand. It was the one thing he had continued to have troubles with and the one thing he refused to use Kage Bushin to help recreate at all. Of course, it was also a very linear technique, so creating a bunch of clones would be next to useless for this jutsu. It was the one thing that he was striving to recreate, the prized jutsu that had made his father feared throughout the elemental nations and earned him his title. The Flying Thunder God, or Hiraishin. Unfortunately for Naruto, his father had left very few notes on just what exactly the Hiraishin was. The notes were vague, adhering to describing what the jutsu did but not tell him much on how it was created. What he did know was that through the means of a Shiki formula, and the use of his father's infamous tri-prong kunai, Minato was able to utilize a space-time ninjutsu that allowed instantaneous teleportation. Naruto assumed the principle behind the technique was similar to the Kuchio's no jutsu, summoning jutsu, in that it revolved around space-time manipulation. So far, Naruto had only made a minuscule amount of progress in the jutsu, since he had nothing to go off of except a description on what it did in the kunai with the Shiki, though he was using a summoning array to start as a basis. Hey Naruto, it's time to pack up. Naruto looked up to see Jiraiya waving at him. Standing up, he made his way over to his sensei. We're leaving, Naruto asked as he created a Kage Bushin and dispelled it, letting his other clones know to dispel themselves in groups of 10 every 5 minutes. Yep, Jiraiya said with a smirk. It's been about a year and I think the only thing you're really missing is experience. Naruto blinked. So we're going somewhere I can gain experience. Jiraiya looked at him and grinned. Not us, you. Jiraiya had sent a message a while ago about giving Naruto a long-term mission to help him gain experience, and he had just received a reply. Kiri, Mist, was apparently still locked in a civil war with Kekkei Genkei on one side and the Mizukage on the other. Mei Terumi, the apparent leader of the bloodline side, had petitioned Konoha for help, hoping that their love of bloodlines would give her some support. Normally, Konoha had a policy of non-aggression and keeping out of international affairs that did not involve them. However, with Jiraiya's recommendation that Naruto needed to experience some things, Tsunade had hesitantly given this mission. Me? Naruto asked in confusion. He was unsure what Jiraiya meant by that. Where will you be? I have some business to take care. Tsunade assigned me a covert operation to gather info on the different hidden villages to see which ones are a threat to Konoha and find out more on Akatsuki. It will be easier for me to sneak around without you. No offense, but while you're a damn good fighter, you can't speak for shit. Hey, Naruto pouted, puffing up his cheeks comically. I was able to paint the Hokage monument in broad daylight and not get caught until I was done. I think that shows how skilled I am. Jiraiya chuckled. True, but this is not Konoha I'll be going to. Many of these places are most likely not friendly and a few may kill you for who you look like. Naruto was silent as he thought about that. It was true that he was starting to look more like his father. Each day that passed he grew more and more like the man. No doubt if Iowa or some other country that harbored a grudge against his father were to see him, they would send assassins out. Naruto was not stupid anymore. He knew that while he was strong, at least mid to high Jonin by now, he was far from invincible. He could hold his own well enough against Jiraiya, but even when the man went all out, he held back some so as not to kill Naruto. Others would have no such compunction and would no doubt not hesitate to kill him. It was also as the man said, he lacked the experience to make full use of his abilities, and that could cost him. So where will I be heading? Naruto asked, having decided this would be a good opportunity to see how well he could do against someone other than Jiraiya. The Toad Sennin gave Naruto a mission scroll. You'll be heading to Kiri, which is currently locked in a civil war. Naruto unrolled the scroll and began to read it while Jiraiya spoke. You will assist the bloodline side until the war is over. The rendezvous point is in the scroll as well as a code word and information about who you will be working with. Naruto nodded as he finished memorizing the information and handed the scroll to Jiraiya, who burned it with a Kaiden jutsu. I'll contact you via summoning from time to time to see how you are doing and give you any info that I feel you can use. Make sure you stay safe. Okay, Gaki. Jiraiya finished. Naruto nodded. Don't you worry, Ero-sensei, I'll do my best. Naruto readjusted the hood to his cloak as he got off the ship he had gotten passage on. Bringing a hand up to his face, he also made sure his face mask was in place to hide his whisker marks before looking around. The port town he was in had definitely seen better days. The ships that would normally be bustling in and out of the port were almost non-existent, with there only being 1 or 2 ships in the dock. Most of the buildings were run down and had rust staining many different areas, making it obvious they either did not have the resources or the people to maintain appearances. The people were even worse off. As Naruto began to walk to the meeting point, he saw more homeless people in this port than he did when Gato had been terrorizing Nami no Kuni, Wave Country. Many of them were sitting off to the sides of the street, begging for money or food, while others were hidden in back alleys and side streets. What was worse was that Naruto could see whole families who were homeless, little children who were even more malnourished than he had been when trying to scrounge a living in the streets of Konoha. Just the sight of seeing how terrible these people had it and knowing there was nothing he could do to help alleviate their pain right now was heartrending for the young man. Out of the corner of his eyes, Naruto saw several figures hopping from the roofs. Ninja with the Kurigakure, Hidden Mist, Hidia 8. He took a moment to watch as several patrols passed by, most likely looking for bloodline rebels and/or dissidents. Naruto watched the ninja as they passed, trying to get a feel for their emotional position. Living in the streets, Naruto had picked up the unique ability to detect what others were thinking and feeling to a certain extent, an ability that had saved him from a number of beatings by drunken villagers in the past by allowing him to avoid the more unsavory people who would wish him harm. Many of the faces on the ninjas here were an open book. The blonde was pleased to see that most of them seemed to feel just as bad as he did about the situation. While their faces showed no emotion, their eyes showed too much. It had always been said that the eyes are the gateway to the soul. For people like Naruto, that had never been more true. Their eyes showed guilt and sadness over what was happening here. Small flickers of eye movement as they flicked their eyes over to some of the homeless people showed that they too wanted to help. Naruto knew they most likely couldn't because the Mizukage had more than likely threatened to kill their families. It was strange. Naruto had heard that during the beginning of his reign the Yondaime Mizukage was one of the most compassionate cages. Naruto did not know what would cause him to change so profoundly, however the evidence of the man becoming corrupted was right here for him to see. Naruto did notice a few ninja who seemed to derive some sort of pleasure from watching those around them suffer and assumed they were the more hardliners of the bloodline haters. Naruto stopped walking as his enhanced hearing picked up a stifled sob. Looking around, he noticed a few of the other ninjas seemed to notice as well and looked even more guilty. Channeling chakra into his ears, Naruto was able to make out the sound better. Let's see, judging from the pitch of the voice, it's a female around her mid to late teens. The sobs sounded pained and Naruto could also hear fear in it. Having never been one to stand by when someone was in that much pain, Naruto put more chakra into his ears to locate the source of the sound. Walking into a small alley, Naruto looked around. When he was sure no one was following him, Naruto disappeared in a gentle breeze. Reappearing on the roof, the blonde crouched down and activated one of the few genjutsu he could do. It was more of a ninjutsu hybrid, much like the standard henge that is taught in the academy. Rather than affect the mind of an opponent, it affects the surroundings of the area. Channeling chakra into the oxygen particles in the air, masking and camouflaging the area around Naruto to make it seem as if there is nothing there. making him invisible to all, but the most powerful of cage-level ninjas are those with dujutsu and enhanced senses like those of the Inuzuka clan. It was a technique Naruto had been taught by Ero Sennin, who used whenever he tried to peek on women, though Naruto understood it had many applications in stealth and espionage as well. Making sure he would not be spotted by any of the ninja that were passing on the roofs, Naruto continued on his way towards the sobs, which were now becoming much louder and clearer. Naruto eventually found the source coming from an abandoned warehouse of some kind. There were no ninja that he could see in this area, but he knew that did not mean anything. He looked towards the second-story window, which is where the voice was coming from. Dropping off the building he was on, Naruto quickly moved towards the warehouse. Channeling chakra to his feet, the blonde shinobi walked up the walls to take a peek inside the window. What he saw was something that would haunt and disgust him for a long time to come. Inside was a young woman who couldn't be more than 16 or 17 years of age. She had long dark brown hair which seemed to be the standard hair color in Kiri, and vibrant green eyes. Her skin was a pale milky smooth color, and she had a figure that Naruto had seen on some of the civilian supermodels that Ero Sensei was with on occasion. At least the woman's eyes would have been vibrant if it were not for the fear in them and the tears that were flowing out of them freely. Her skin, which would probably have looked perfect and beautiful, was instead black from multiple large bruises that covered most of it from her neck to her legs. Her face had several welts and bruises, no doubt from being hit and smacked multiple times. The obvious source of this woman's fear and pain was right in front of her, a man who looked to be in his mid-30s. He had a medium height and medium build, with black hair and brown eyes. The man was obviously a Kiri shinobi, since the man was still wearing his Hidia 8 on his head, however everything else was gone. The man was completely and currently in the process of raping the young woman. Judging from the bruising on her, some of which looked several days old, this was not the first time he had done so. Naruto's blood began to boil as he gnashed his teeth together hard enough that the coppery and tangy taste of blood came to the blonde as his gums began to bleed. Naruto had always held a deep-seated respect for women that sometimes bordered on worship. He was not sure what it was about them that made him feel this way, but it was part of the reason he had never raised his hand to Sakura when she would hit him. Sure, Naruto was not a virgin anymore and had in fact slept with several girls in the past year, but he would never do anything unless the woman he was with wanted to. To see some man, no, a monster, doing something like this to an innocent young woman was nearly enough to send him on a killing spree of every shinobi in this village. Closing his eyes, Naruto quickly reined in the impulse and took several deep breaths. Even if he tried to, he would not be strong enough to defeat an entire town of ninja. He could not do anything about them right now. He looked into the window. While he may not be able to do anything about this town, but he could at least help this woman. Ha ha ha, come on, you know you love it. Kurai Mushishi laughed as he listened to woman sob and cry. A Jonin of Kiri for nearly 10 years, Kurai was considered a sick bastard even by his peers. He had become a genin at an early age and had risen through the ranks fairly quickly. It had at one point in time it had been the man's hopes to become a member of the Kiri no Shinobigatana Nananan-shu, 7 swordsmen of the mist, before they had fallen from grace. When they had been disbanded due to the betrayals of nearly all the shinobi in that group except one, he had just opted to find some other way to gain glory. While he had yet to find glory, he had found several ways to entertain himself. He looked down at the young teenage girl he was pounding himself into. Her pleas were like music to his ears. Ah, did I ever tell you how you are? He was cut off from speaking as a pair of hands wrapped around his head, one covering his mouth and the other on the back. With a quick twist, the hands snapped Kurai's neck and let him fall out of the girl and drop to the floor, revealing Naruto, who was glaring at the corpse as if hoping it would spontaneously combust. Taking his attention off the now dead shinobi, Naruto looked over at the girl and winced. She looked like she was going into shock, no doubt from seeing someone die. Her eyes were wide and she was starting to hyperventilate. He made to move over to the girl and help treat her wounds, but stopped when she turned her attention to him and began backing away. Please, don't hurt me. The girl's voice chocked as she continued to back away, despite the fact that she was already pressed against the head of the bed. Please, I don't. Naruto pulled down his hood and face mask to give the girl the most compassionate smile he could muster despite the sick feeling he had in the pit of his stomach. Don't worry, I'm not gonna hurt you. The girl looked at him and seemed to calm down a bit. I just want to help you, Naruto continued as he made slow movements towards her. You do? She asked as a small flicker of hope appeared in her eyes for a brief moment before vanishing. How do I know I can trust you? She asked in a low voice. You don't, Naruto said, keeping his tone warm and kind. I have no way of proving to you that I don't mean you any harm. All you can do is choose to trust or not trust that what I say is true. However, I promise you right now that I will help you and take you somewhere safe where you won't ever have to deal with things like what that man did to you again. The girl looked at him for a second before slowly relaxing. She scooted herself away from the head of the bed and moved to the center of the mattress. Naruto made slow movements towards her to make sure she did not freak out before sitting at the edge of the bed next to her. I'm going to take out a scroll containing medical supplies to heal you, is that okay? Naruto asked. He received a cautious nod and slowly reached into his pouch, which had several containment seals that were used to hold his various ninja tools. Pulling out a scroll, Naruto unrolled it on the bed and unsealed the materials. A number of medicinal creams, disinfectant and medical bandages came out of the seal. Naruto had long since realized that he would never be able to use medical jutsu, not just because he was always constantly battling to keep his control at the level it was at due to the constant increase in his reserves, but also because his chakra had traces of the Kyuubi's in it. While the minuscule amounts did nothing to him since he has had the fox since birth, they were incredibly toxic to others. Still, that did not mean that he would not do the best he could to make up for his deficiency in this area by becoming adept at the creation of healing ointments and herbology. Naruto picked up one of the tubes containing one of his own personal creations. To make up for his lack of being unable to use healing jutsu, Naruto had long since decided to try and make a healing cream based off of his own abilities of regeneration. Naruto had always known that he healed quickly. Wounds that would take weeks for others to heal were gone in hours, and ones that took months to heal disappeared within a day. Naruto knew this was due to Kyuubi and the seal on his stomach, which channeled the fox's chakra into his body at a constant rate. A little over a month ago, Naruto had been able to replicate that ability to an extent and make a powerful healing cream. Utilizing the art of Fuinjutsu, sealing art, Naruto had come up with a modified containment seal that was designed to be able to store Kyuubi's chakra. With the use of several powerful purification seals that were designed based off the ones on the Shikifuin, Naruto was able to purify Kyuubi's chakra to the point that it was no longer poisonous to humans. Of course, because of the potency of the chakra, it still had to be given in low doses. Lethal wounds like being impaled or broken bones could not be healed with the maximum amount that could be used on a person, which was about the amount of chakra used to make a standard Bushin jutsu. But wounds like bruises and small scrapes and cuts were an easy fix for the ointment, which had the chakra that was stored in the seal mixed into it. I need you lie down while I apply some healing cream to your bruises, can you do that? Naruto asked in a calming voice. The woman nodded and laid herself down on her back as Naruto uncorked the lid to his ointment. Dabbing a little on his fingers, he lightly rubbed them together so the chakra in the cream would activate. He began to gently rub the medical cream on the girl's stomach, which was the area with the most bruising. The young woman hissed in a bit of pain before the healing effects kicked in, causing her to relax. In a few minutes, the large black bruise that had been on her abdomen was gone. Naruto continued applying the cream to the various bruises before moving on to the cuts, using a disinfectant before using the cream. When it was done, the blonde wrapped the larger cuts in bandages, making sure all the wrappings were secured and covered as he allowed himself to feel a small amount of pride. If he were honest with himself, he had far more respect for healers like Tsunade Ba-chan, rather than warriors like himself. After all, it was easy to take a life and far harder to save a life. Can you stand? Naruto asked as he held out his hand to the young girl. She hesitated for a moment before taking it and standing. The young woman let out a yelp of pain as she began to fall. Naruto wrapped an arm around her waist and gently lifted her up while being careful not to touch her bandaged areas. Naruto sighed. Her legs were probably broken. Would you like me to carry you? The woman looked at him and bit her lip. It was obvious she still had a distrust of him because of what that Kiri shinobi did, not that Naruto could blame her. He waited patiently for her to answer. You promise you won't do anything? Naruto smiled. I promise. The woman closed her eyes as she seemed to come to a decision. When she gave a nod of assent, Naruto reached into his pouch. Channeling chakra into one of the seals, he pulled out a large cloak, wrapping it around her to cover her modesty. He gently lifted her up in a bridal carry, making sure her head was resting comfortably on his shoulder. Without hand seals, Naruto created a cage bushin with mental orders to destroy any and all evidence of the three of them ever being here. With a nod to its creator, the clone went to work. The woman in his arms began to nod off as Naruto left through the window, feeling lulled by the comforting and warm aura that the blonde possessed. Before she fell asleep, a stray thought crossed her mind. I don't even know your name. She looked up at Naruto to see what she now realized were some of the most beautiful blue eyes she had ever seen as he gave her a soft smile. The last thing she heard before falling asleep was, "It's Naruto." XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Outside for what felt like the 100th time today as he waited for the person who was supposed to lend them aid to arrive, whoever it was extremely late. In the ninja world, this usually meant one of three things: they had gotten caught up in something. This could be caused by anything from simple forgetfulness to getting into a fight with other shinobi, with neither of those being very good. They hadn't even gotten here yet. Given the trouble it took to get into Kiri, their support had been given some leeway in this. Ao had been given a week to stake the place out, with today being the last day. Or the final thing that could have happened, this person had been killed on his way here, either before or after they got here. Crossing his arms, Ao began to tap his fingers, a dull rhythm against his arms. This was unbelievable that someone would take this long to get here and not even have the courtesy to send a message. Back in his day, people were prompt about being on time to any important engagements like this. A nudge on his shoulder brought Ao out of his mental ramblings. Looking towards one of the men in his squad who was with him for this assignment, Ao saw him nudge his head. Looking over in the direction indicated, he spotted a man wearing a black cloak that reached down the ground. The hood was up, covering the man's face, with the only thing Ao was able to see being a blue face mask covering the bottom half of the man's face. The odd thing about the man was that he was carrying something in his arms. Judging from the shape and size, it was most likely a person. Ao activated the Byakugan in his left eye, spotting the 3 whisker marks on each cheek as he used the Dujutsu's X-ray vision. Ao relaxed ever so slightly. While this man could be their contact, which had been described by a message Terumi-sama had gotten a while ago, it could also be an imposter. As the cloaked man came closer, Ao stopped him. You look like you're pretty far from home, son. The figure chuckled. I was told there are many opportunities in Mizu no Kuni and came to try my luck. The voice sounded younger than he expected, but Ao visibly relaxed as he heard the password. He would still need to be weary, but at least now they could move on. You're later than I thought you would be, Ao said, watching as the man shifted his attention to the form he was carrying. Now that he was not paying as much attention to their support, he took the time to notice that the figure the man was carrying was a person, a woman to be exact. Sorry, the man said, I was held up. Ao sensed the underlying meaning to his words and couldn't help but wince. While most of the people on the Mizukage's side were forced to fight, there were others who were not above committing such atrocious acts. Well, I suppose it's fine since you're here, Ao began, still back in my day. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Naruto sighed as he set the young woman down on the bed in the medical room of the main base to the rebel faction. He looked over towards Ao and nodded. The two of them soon walked out of the room and made their way down a long hallway with various doors leading to places like storage and living spaces. Now that he was not worried about his charge, Naruto turned his attention to the man who he had met at the port. Ao was a middle-aged man with a patch over his right eye and talismans in his ear with the kanji for Sho Ukatamwa, to hear, on both sides. Naruto was able to spot the rather intricate-looking seal that was hidden within the kanji. Given the chakra Naruto could feel emanating from under the man's eye patch, the blonde assumed he had a transplanted dujutsu like Kakashi. His hair was a light blue in color and looked similar to Kisami's hair. He was wearing the Kiri Hidia 8 around his head. He was wearing a pair of striped shirt and pants with a green robe over them in the standard hunter nin attire of Kiri. Suddenly they stopped at a door that was at the end of the hallway and Ao knocked. "Come in." Naruto blinked at the very feminine tone as Ao opened the door and entered with Naruto following right behind. When Naruto entered, he saw a woman sitting at a large desk and felt a slight hitch in his breath. During his travels he had seen and been with many beautiful women. Out of all those he had seen so far, this woman took the cake. The woman was very slender and looked to be in her late 20s to early 30s. With ankle-length auburn hair done up in a herringbone pattern at the back with a top knot tied with a dark blue band and 4 bangs in front of her face, one of which covered her right eye. Her face was perfectly heart-shaped and feminine, yet had the look of a leader who had earned the respect of her people. Her skin was a light milky color that looked soft, smooth and delicate despite the fact that they were in a war. She wore a long-sleeved dark blue dress that fell just below the knees. It was closed at the front with a zipper and was kept open at the front right side from the waist down. The dress only covered up to the upper part of her arms, leaving slender yet strong-looking shoulders and the lower part of her S, showing off her beautiful D-sized chest. Under that was a mesh shirt that covered a little more of her arms and chest, but still left a good amount of cleavage showing. She also wore shorts in the same color as her dress and mesh leggings that went to her knees. Under that, she was wearing high heels with shin guards instead of sandals. "Terumi-sama," Ao's voice interrupted Naruto's thoughts. "This is the support that Konoha was able to send us." The man sounded somewhat disgruntled at only receiving one person for help, but Mei didn't seem to be bothered as she smiled at Naruto. She slowly stood from her desk and walked towards Naruto as she held out her hand. "I would like to thank you for coming to our aid. In all honesty, I had not expected to receive much help, if any at all, Mr." She trailed off, obviously fishing for a name. "Naruto," the blonde said with a smile towards the busty red-headed woman as he shook her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mei-san." Naruto paused when he noticed Mei looking up and down his form and couldn't help but grin. "I take it you approve of what you see." Naruto felt Ao as well as the 2 Anbu who were in the room stiffen and glare at him, but Mei seemed to ignore it as she favored him with another smile. "I'll tell you, if you let me know what you think of me." That seemed to throw the others in the room through a loop. Naruto chuckled. "Let's put it this way, if ever there was a goddess walking this earth, I have no doubt that I've just found her." Mei, to her credit, only took a light tint of pink to her cheeks as she gave him a favoring grin. "Then you can assume I approve of what I see." She took one last eyeful of him before putting on her business face. "As much as I would love to continue this banter with you, I need to tell you what our situation is and see if I can't give you your first mission." Naruto nodded as his face instantly became blank. "I am at your disposal, Mei-san." XXXXXXXXXXXXX. Takane Nobata was a middle-aged man with long black hair and coal-black eyes, wearing the standard garb of a Kiri Chunin. At the age of 11 he had graduated the academy, killing off the person he had spent his entire time with there, as was the standard graduation exam before the graduation was changed thanks to Zabuza. Over the years he kept average stats, with an average number of missions. He became a Chunin after his 6th try in Iwa and continued on to become an average ninja. When the Bloodline Wars started, he had stayed with the Mizukage. While he did not really care about the sides or killing bloodline bearers, he was loyal and would not betray the Mizukage. Altogether there was nothing special about him, he was a fairly average pay.